consistently and being made regularly. And because the legislative process is complex, it takes time to do those things. I looked for best practices, and in addition, I had an opportunity to get information from two other parliaments, the House of Commons in London and the Tweede Kamer in the Netherlands, and I'll share some findings from that experience as well. My findings fall into the 6 categories that you see. First, tracking systems. Second, committee activities. Third, plenary sessions. Then I ask about methods for enhancing our understanding, the challenge of integration and navigation, and finally I ask, how do we establish our vision, our goals, and our management responsibility? With regard to tracking systems, the European Parliament has 2 tracking systems. And I should say by tracking systems, I mean those systems which we use whose purpose is to keep track of the legislation as it is introduced, to track its actions, what happens to that legislation, does it pass, does it fail, what do the committees do to it, what happens to it on plenary, what votes are occurring, etc. The European Parliament has 2 systems that track legislation. The first is l'OE, which is prepared by the Parliament itself. The second is PRELEX. PRELEX is managed by the European Commission. I would say both of these systems in general meet high standards of accuracy, but there are some differences that affect their authoritativeness. For example, I found that in the PRELEX system, which is run by the Commission, when the Parliament passes or agrees to a measure, the PRELEX system points to an earlier version of that document and not to the version that was actually passed by the Parliament. I'll show you an example of that. You recall I said earlier, do we put up the correct version every time? This was an instance in which, for various systems reasons, the link is to the wrong document, and it can occur. In fact, it does occur. Completeness. Notice that the user must consult 2 systems in the European Parliament in order to get all of the information that he or she needs. Even though PRELEX points to the wrong version of a document, it has more information about what goes on in the Commission and the Council than the l'OE system does. So users have to go to 2 different places to get the most comprehensive or most complete picture. And equally importantly, key information from committees and plenary sessions is not linked, as I will show you later. With regard to the other 2 criteria, clarity and context, I was delighted to find that the summaries of proposed legislation that are prepared by the European Parliament staff are excellent, in my opinion. And let me tell you that in my job in the United States, I supervised a group of people who were responsible for preparing summaries of the legislation of the U.S. Congress. So I know this area, and I can say that the job being done at the European Parliament is better than the job that we were doing in the United States. So we already have a lesson learned, which I'll be taking back to my colleagues in the U.S. Congress. They will not be happy to see me. The summaries are clear, they're accurate, they provide context. They do take time to prepare, and that is always a challenge. The l'OE and PRELEX systems do provide some explanation of the legislative process, but unfortunately it is seldom provided in context, which means that if you're looking at a particular action, you may not have that information explained to you. In the interest of time, I will not go online at this point to show you a live presentation of these 2 systems, but I have in the slides samples of these two systems, which I want to use to illustrate the points that I was making. If you'll notice on this slide, this is a picture of the information about the status of a bill that passed the European Parliament. Many of you may be familiar with it. It was called the Internal Services Directive. It was a several-year effort to pass a controversial piece of legislation that would enable services to be offered on a European-wide basis. Just as goods and manufactured articles can be exchanged now, they wanted to do the same thing for services. You'll notice the first arrow points to the fact that the European Parliament had a first reading. And that means, in effect, that they agreed to that version of the committee's bill. The next arrow, as you can see from the tab on the left-hand side, says the Commission modified their legislative proposal. And the third arrow says that the Council prepared a statement on its common position. Please note the dates of the last two arrows. One is in April, and the other is in July. So the Parliament passed the bill in February, as you can see from the first arrow. The Commission modified its position in April, and the Council made a statement on its common position in July. This is a picture of the screen for the same bill from Prelex, which is the Commission system. You'll notice that the arrow points to action that occurred in May. In this case, the Council reached political agreement on a common position 2 months before it was reported in the LOI system. That's because the Prelex system spends more time and effort tracking the activities of the Commission and the Council. And the LOI system spends more time tracking the activities of the Parliament. What that means is that the user is caught in between, and as I've said, must use both to get a full picture. So it's a little like having two email systems. If you've ever had two email systems, you know that it's a problem because you always do one and then you have to do the other, and sometimes you forget. Users are asked to remember there are two systems and that the information is not always the same. Now I want to talk about the tracking systems in the United States Congress. I mentioned that we have two systems, THOMAS, which is the public system, and the Legislative Information System, or the LIS, which is the internal system. Again, our accuracy and timeliness is fairly good, although I suggested that there are some challenges with committee information that I'll get to in a moment. We have good error-correcting procedures, which we try to correct errors very quickly. It is true that for us, we can have some very long bills in the United States system. You can have a bill that's over 1,000 pages, especially at the end of the year. And if there are a lot of amendments, it can take not just days, but sometimes a week or two to prepare the next version of that bill. So the timeliness there is not so much that we're slow, but that we're trying to get it right, but it still takes time. We do have, I think, in the United States, have done a good job with regard to integrating information sources, especially committee and floor activities. And the LIS, the internal system, also integrates commercial systems. We link, because the Congress subscribes to some commercial information systems, for the Congress alone, we link to certain information that is paid for. In the U.S. system, we have a problem with something called incorporated bills, where it can be difficult to track bills because we can combine bills into one large bill, and we don't always tell you that we did that. So there is sometimes an issue of completeness in that area. With regard to clarity and context, I've already commented that we also prepare summaries of proposed legislation. We cover all the versions of the bill, but as I've suggested, They're not quite as good as the ones I saw at the European Parliament. They provide no context. They provide no comparison. They simply say, this